So if we pick the sort of company stage then, perhaps if we're talking about a SaaS business in the very early stages, let's say, for instance, you or a marketeer is going in there to set things up, the first marketeer the business has had then. You talked about a couple of plays there, but what would you be thinking about? Because these roles are some of the toughest roles out there. You're time poor, you're resource poor, but you've got a huge amount of expectation.
Well, one caveat today, if you've got to be pretty bad if you can't get funding. There's almost $300 billion in funding year to date. Yeah. Just as an example, there's been $275 billion in IPO as of September, 309 companies. So all that being said, let's just say you're the first marketeer in. It's typically, hopefully not a CMO. It's that first stage where you're going and you're getting a customer base. If I'm playing, I'm the executive or I'm an investor, I want a product marketeer and I want someone who's more well-rounded in building out some fundamental marketing things. So it's typically maybe a team of 3 to 5 to get started, all depending. It may be that it already has some product market fit and it has enough money behind it. You may go to 8 to 10, but you're typically not bringing a CMO in at that stage. You're bringing in more hands-on with leadership so they can lead, but they're more hands-on. And product marketing is critical. Why? Those use cases. Getting that to product roadmap and not trying to build everything, build what's going to get those use cases maximized and that adoption in play, always with a vision and a roadmap that can be altered, but that is so critical in that discipline. It's when you get that product market fit that's there, now you want to bring in, as you described, Matt, very well, I think that's when you want your more senior executive to come in for marketing, when you really need to build out the go-to-market engine, which requires many moving parts, including your story, including more of a content engine that can scale, including taking your tech stack and infrastructure to the next level, how you use data, hiring the organization that probably scales from 6 to 8 to 10 to more up into the 14 to 20, where you start to, we have dedicated web team, we have a dedicated corp comm team. So you can see those things happen to support this next level of growth and to accelerate what you've built in those first, handful of years or earlier if you hit the slipstream, if the company takes off faster.
Yeah, well, it's interesting hearing you talk because you can tell you're West Coast America, because actually there's investment, and that's not the accent, there's investment in the UK and Europe, but a lot of the time there just isn't the same sort of investment. So when you talk about sort of going in as sort of 3 to 5, which makes total sense, by the way, a lot of companies that we speak to who have had funding will start off with a single marketeer. So, and kind of build out from there.
That's not unusual. And by the way, you can see the picture in my background. That is West Coast USA for sure. And by the way, one person or something like that is okay. But it's not an army of people that you're hiring. You have to be a Swiss Army knife and ability to understand and do some fundamental marketing. And to me, it's also focused heavily on things like sales enablement and getting your basic story down and beginning to find those use cases. It's even more important if that's the case, where you're not going to go on a high growth run early, that you focus marketing's energy.
It's interesting that you say that. So when you say focusing marketing's energy, what do you mean by that? Because some people might think of it as, okay, well, I'm going into a new business. I'm going to experiment wide and see what works. How would you sort of tackle that?
Well, one is that if it's that early, the way you're describing as one marketeer, that really focuses on getting your product market fit, your unique value propositions, and your use cases. And that may take a little bit longer. If you're only hiring one marketer, you haven't felt the lift of immediate traction. So you're right. It's more research oriented. You still are looking for advocates and feedback. It may not be at the same scale, and it may not be 30 or 40 people who are advocates and can help you move your company and your market segment forward. but it may be 10 or 20 that you want to get on your team that are genuinely helping you, and you're asking for feedback to take that in and get direct interaction. You also probably are going to be a little bit more focused on sales enablement in the scenario, Matt, that you outlined, where there's one or two marketeers and you're not in that growth phase. Why? Because your salespeople, hopefully you hire, also have relationships, and they are going to go to their customers that they've worked with over time. Again, not all businesses, but this is the ideal scenario and what you should try to do. But marketing is going to have to ramp pretty fast these days. And Matt, that's the difference between today and 2 years ago. Yeah. So let me describe that. So that's why when you asked me, I said, I've altered my playbook. Well, let's take a look at that scenario. We go into lockdown, nearly 2 years ago. The buying and the selling process changed because of it. The buyers, right? The salesperson's not, hey, I'm going to be coming through Southampton in a week. Do you have time to meet? They say that's not on the table. So the world's gone more digital. The buyers who used to meet in a conference room to discuss and do the parameters of what they needed are all working remotely, and they may not be as connected. There's so much more digital and many digital touch points. So in order to make that traction, marketing has to play a bigger role in the buying and selling process today than it did 2 years ago. So that changes the dynamics. My playbook, a big piece of it could be outdated because of these facts and changes. And then lastly, that buyer or the B2B professional may not go back to the old ways because now the company has a different procurement and a different process for purchasing things. So it's really crazy how much it's changed. And why I always believe that product marketing has to be fundamental to that earlier stage company, because they can help listen and understand in the market and work internally with product and operations and things you need to do to really aim that use case development and ICP, et cetera. Not product marketing on its own, but a lot of people miss that because they assume, let me strike that statement, a lot of teams miss that because they assume that it becomes internally focused and this is the solution. And it rarely ever is. You rarely get it right on your first or second or even third take. It's an evolutionary thing you build on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When senior leadership teams are trying to turn on the taps too much and really they haven't really figured out those fundamental bits that you would get if you've hired a product marketer.